So this is the first part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast online from London by the Khoodeelaar campaign in association with a number of other action programs, including the comparatively recent action called End Hunger at Root. Now we started The Guardian, which has got on page 20 an item about the High Street 2 campaign by the protesters who are defending their action by digging a tunnel in protest. Now, we have said from the beginning of this action being carried out by the protesters against the HS2, who have begun or added the activities or against HS2 by digging a tunnel under, roughly speaking, the Euston and St. Pancras areas in central London. Now, the High Court judge has ruled against a call to halt the eviction of protesters from a tunnel beside Euston Square in central London on grounds of safety. That's the first paragraph quoted in The Guardian today, page 20, a piece by Diane Taylor, Thursday, the 11th of February, 2021. Now, we've said that the protesters, by digging the tunnel, will fail to stop HS2. We have not said that negatively. We solidarize with all the campaigners against HS2. But this particular action is impractical and is most unlikely to create the necessary political pressure on the UK government fronted by the Boris Johnson cabal, because no career of a politician worthy of being counted as significant to matter enough so that the government is compelled to scrap or drop or ditch the HS2 project. Nothing like that has been kind of seen in the program of action by the anti-HS2 activists. And our campaign, Khoodeelaar campaign, also has been about stopping a railway line or a particular alignment of the railway line, which is yet to go operational, which is already 3 calendar years late in going operational across London. It's called Crossrail. And we said in our initial comments on the tunnel dug by the HS2 protesters that the tunnel may be in the news because of the kind of oddity of events, but it will not be politically effective. And the reason we have said that, and we said that today, is in short this: no political career is being threatened. And despite the fact that politics is corrupt and so on, it is the political kind of bureaucracy that makes the decision about a political project, which is HS2, and it's severely detrimental to the society, to the environment, everything, this HS2 scam. And it is corrupt, it is undemocratic, and all the rest of it. But to deal with all of these defects is not to go underground or underneath as the main kind of frontage of the current action. The dealing with it must be done by focusing attention on those members of parliament along the route who are supporting the HS2 kind of attack on the environment, on the economy, on the society, and to focus on them by raising daily, non-stop awareness about their role in comparison with the damage that their role is aiding to be perpetuated and perpetrated on the areas affected. That is not being done. What the protesters have been doing for the last few years, that we have been monitoring their activities online, is complaining against HS2. That's not what will stop HS2, because HS2 is a creature, as a creation, as an entity that has been created politically, both by the government and the members of parliament. And those political creators of this problem need to be hit with the appropriate political action that will stop them. Hopefully, this statement I have just made as a summarized version of the details will reach the people who are doing the campaign. This is what the Khoodeelaar campaign created. This method of political action against a railway scam that is worth billions of pounds. We, of course, did the outlining and the kind of explaining of the technical problems that the Crossrail whole plot against the Brick Lane area represented and contained. That we did as the basic ground of information, ground of the facts. But what we did effectively against the political establishment, the political forces, the political entities, was to focus attention on them and make them literally unsafe holders of those political positions. And we included as the main target of our political action in that way the councillors in elected posts in the local Tower Hamlets Council. Councillors including occupants of the post or posts in succession of the leaders or the leader of the Tower Hamlets Council, which has and had a democratic facade, a democratic frontage, a democratic appearance, a kind of contextual basis for it to be called a democratic council, despite the fact that its councillors and the leaders and the executives appointed and approved by the councillors were breaking the democratic rules, which is the rules mean that they should be serving the needs of the local community that was targeted by the attack plot in the Crossrail whole scam. So we brought out the evidence about the councillor's role And that is how we expose them to the attention of the ordinary people in the area that would be affected and were going to be displaced and were going to be thrown out of their home, their estates, and their housing, the buildings in which they lived and their kind of homes were going to be completely made unsafe, literally unsafe. So all of that we did for 7, 8, 9 years. Altogether, we did it up to the time when until the Crossrail whole plot was ditched, scrapped by the UK government and the so-called department at the expense of the transport needs of the country. Department for Transport, they call it. And we called it daft, as stupid. But the daft word we used, but we hadn't originated the word daft. It was one of the words that had been used based on the evidence of the misconduct and stupidity of the Department of Transport, and it had been used as daft. It had been called daft by the so-called satirical magazine, the fortnightly Private Eye. But we didn't copy them. We used it independently of them by editing the 3 letters in the abbreviation DFT as daft, adding an A. But it appeared that, or it could appear that we had copied the Private Eye. We hadn't. But that is a coincidence, let's say. And the coincidence, actually the reason for the coincidence is also similar. Because Private Eye published periodically accounts of the DFT, that is to Department for Transport, behaving idiotically. One of the reasons. In context of our campaign against Crossrail, that we used to call it, so that we could call it daft and stupid and idiotic. Now the other reason why the so-called anti-HS2 campaigners have not taken our advice is racist. Because those racists are not doing something original either. They are doing what racists always do. Racists do not want to be seen to be taking the lead from people of African or Asian origins or identities or backgrounds. And the Khoodeelaar campaign is very much a campaign created and run by myself, and I'm Asian. And this is where the racists on the left and the so-called left in the UK are failing miserably, because we are ahead intellectually. We are not taking lessons from them. We are giving them, offering them, making available to them lessons that are absolutely rock solid, based on empirical action, evidence, and history. This goes back to the so-called departure of the imperialist British Raj in August 1947 from the subcontinent. Most of the political kind of action that was taken over the 190 years against the East India Company and the British Raj or British Empire were initiated by people in the subcontinent, what is now mainly Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. And all those initiatives proved to be very original and solid and got vindicated over periods of time. We shall be talking more about the 75 years or 74 calendar years since 1947 throughout the coming programs. But in this context, it is also the case that the so-called left in British politics generally is racist and never acknowledges any action, let alone by name or naming the organizers and the initiators and the campaign mobilizers and organizers in any part of the subcontinent during, even including the period of the 1857 kind of mobilization against the British. And they most certainly don't mention those activities that were associated with Mohanchand Karamchand Gandhi or M.K. Gandhi. They only acknowledge Gandhi as a peace activist, which is fine. But the political role in the analysis of the corrupt British Empire that Gandhi was associated with making, they leave out. And we talk about Gandhi also being overhyped about his short stay at an address which is in Tower Hamlets. They don't actually mention Gandhi as an opponent of empire and imperialism and racism. They dilute his anti-racist, anti-imperialist aspects of his work and make him like a dummy, a plastic, like they have converted Martin Luther King into a plastic after his murder, his assassination. So we shall be talking about those in due course, of course, but what has happened in the HS2, against the HS2, is that these racists at the Guardian are not prepared to refer to the Khoodeelaar campaign, let alone the campaign run by the Khoodeelaar organizer against the key institutions that make the UK government, constitute the UK government, and how the Khoodeelaar campaign effectively exposed the corruption in all the key institutions, the judiciary, and so on. So when the HS2 protesters, the tunnel protesters, are rejected an application by a judge in a court in London, the role of the corrupt judiciary is urgently in need of being examined afresh in factual terms, which is what we are doing in this part of the world exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now we shall read more paragraphs of this corrupt, racist, stupid Guardian. Now remember the disclaimer which I hereby and here on update. Words like stupid, corrupt, criminal, racist, these words are not used carelessly or without absolute substance of evidence. So, anyone watching must remember that we are doing this because those words and terms are the most appropriate in the context of our diagnostic examination of the content and the role of the corrupt, racist, lying Fleet Street, of which the pretentious Guardian is a part. So it says, a High Court judge has ruled against a call to halt the eviction of protesters from a tunnel beside Euston Square in central London on grounds of safety. The second paragraph says, 7 people are occupying the tunnel to raise awareness both of the climate emergency and the damage they claim is being done by the HS2 rail project. Now, notice what she's saying. This is the Diane Tyler piece on The Guardian. It says that the climate emergency and the damage they claim is being done by the HS2 rail project, which is The Guardian staying apart, refusing to positively refer to the campaign against HS2. They say, or they claim, there's a distancing. Mrs. Justice Stein, however you pronounce the Stein or Stein, which is spelled S for sugar, T for Tommy, E for England, Y for yellow, N for Neil, or no one. Mrs. Justice Stein rejected the claim by Dr. Larch Maxey, the protester who brought the case, that the eviction by HS2's contractors was not being handled safely and in compliance with the human rights obligations. In her judgment, Stein described the tunnel as being poorly constructed and liable to collapse. Now, that is a very true kind of possibility. It may not happen, but it is a possibility. It can happen. She accepted reassurances provided by HS2 in response to concerns raised by the protesters' tunnel expert, Peter Folding, about a lack of specialist experience and equipment that HS2's contractors' national eviction team had to carry out the eviction. She also rejected concerns about a lack of planning and accepted HS2's evidence that it had drawn up detailed risk assessments before embarking on the launch on the tunnel eviction. She rejected requests from the activists that HS2 should provide them with sufficient food and water, saying they are not detained or stuck in the tunnel. They are choosing to remain there as trespassers. So this is the corrupt judicial bureaucracy. This is the corrupt judicial bureaucracy, and this is 99% the likely role being played by the judicial bureaucracy if the Khoodeelaar campaign or the campaign against the Crossrail hole aimed at Brick Lane had made any application to the High Court at the time. Because the High Court would be totally behaving as a stooge of the government, which is what this summary printed in the Guardian, not the whole of the copy that is there in the Guardian. I've read a few paragraphs, but all the paragraphs are hostile to the protesters. All the paragraphs are devoid of any reference to the environment, to the economy. and most certainly devoid of any reference to the diversion of essential money from health service, employment, housing, to this completely dubious and corrupt excuse that is being used to fill the pockets of multi-billionaire kind of crooks posing as contractors. And this Justice Stein, the spelling here is Stein, Steyn. Any woman put in the judiciary is 100% likely to behave as a right winger. That is the evidence based on the behavior of women put in judicial positions. Any ethnicity linked woman put in place as a member of the judiciary is likely to behave as a stooge of the racists. And the likelihood is based on the evidence. And it is 90 to 95% likely that they would be doing that, behaving in that way. And so therefore the Guardians, another piece in the Guardian, well, we shall refer to that piece, that topic, as it is contained in the Times today, rather than in the Guardian, because the piece in the Times contains more contents of the piece and the item being a racist one than it could be probably the case if carried in the Guardian version. It says there are 2 Labour MPs are fueling racist kind of tropes, that is racist misinformation. That is what they're being accused of. And it's a piece promoting a man called Neil O'Brien, who is described as the chairman of the Conservatives Policy Board, who is reported as saying, or reported as having said, that ethnic minority MPs were facing unacceptable smears from their opponents simply for supporting the party. What he's saying is that the Conservatives, stooges, as Conservative MPs, are being called stooges by 2 of the Labour Party MPs. One is described as Clive Lewis of mixed race, and Naz Shah is an MP of Pakistani origin. Those 2 are saying things that are absolutely factually correct. And the Times is describing this as the Conservatives want them to describe the behavior of the 2 Labour MPs who are criticizing Asian and African MPs, who are Asian and African Conservative MPs. And although they are not saying this in the Times piece, contextually it is very likely that this piece has appeared as part of the Boris Johnson-fronted cabal's racist kind of stooging of the likes of this woman, Kemi Broadenoch. Kemi Broadenoch is the minister, Conservative minister, and she was born in London, but she is of Nigerian background and married to a white man. And she has been condemned correctly for undermining and kind of insultingly addressing an African origin journalist, a woman journalist. And as a result of that, she was cited by another African origin conservative who threatened to disassociate himself from a conservative operation based on the fact that the Conservative Party's black MP or MPs were being racist. Well, he didn't say racist, as I pointed out 2-3 days ago, but he said words to the effect that they're causing division. That is a stooge refusing the word, the truthful word, which would be racist, division. Division is absolutely a completely dubious word that actually is employed in denial of racism being active. So we come from the Guardians, HS2 protesting racists, refusing to take lesson from the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, which is the only campaign that has done anything like this in the context of confronting the undemocratic unconstitutional behavior of the UK Parliament, UK government on a major project. So this is historic. And then we've got this attack on Clive Lewis and Naz Shah by the Times and the Conservatives think tank, so-called. So what is happening in this country today is racists staging a comeback and resurgence with Boris Johnson's collaborator and colluder and long-time servant of the dirty digger Rupert Murdoch. The Scotsman turned into Little Englander, aggressive Little Englander Brexiteer, Andrew Neil, launching this new television channel. And the channel is dedicated to attacking anti-racists. However limited the anti-racist activities, the racist resurgence is being justified by claiming falsely and racistly that anti-racists are too active against racism. So their attack includes also racist media organizations like the BBC, which is racist. But the racists outside of the BBC are alleging that the BBC is too anti-racist. The BBC has never been anti-racist at all, let alone too anti-racist. And this explains, these connections explain why Brexit happened and why Brexit is coming apart. Because one of the papers today, Fleet Street, admits that Amsterdam is kind of becoming the center of a lot of financial activities that were carried out for many years in London, which activities had made London or the city of London to claim that it was the center of the European or world financial activities. And when the liars were saying that Brexit, when it happened, which is now happening, would allow Little Englanders to take back control. Now, if the financial kind of activities, central financial activities are being shifted to Holland, then that claim falls apart. And that is what is happening. That is exactly what is happening. And the Financial Times earlier this week, on Monday, led on the front page with this: the cost of liability insurance for company directors soars. Reforms look at personal responsibility and pandemic decisions increase exposure. But they are not telling the truth in that headline or in that heading, because the truth is the impact of Brexit as well. Not just the COVID impact, but the Brexit impact. Now, going on to talk about racism in the BBC, which is what we find the BBC as racist. There is a piece on page 23 of today's Times, owned by Murdoch, that the BBC is being accused of breaking diversity policies with board call. And it's a piece by somebody called Matthew Moore, who writes, the BBC has accused, I read that again, not has, but has been. The BBC has been accused of violating its diversity commitments. The BBC has been accused of violating its diversity commitments after removing, notice the coming words, the only ethnic minority members of the news board in a cost-cutting exercise. Now, Kamal Ahmed is leaving as BBC News editorial director in a restructuring that will also involve the departure of Gavin Allen as head of news output and Joe Carr as head of current affairs. Ahmed, a former economics editor, had been an architect of the newsroom modernization announced in January last year, in which commissioning power shifted from programs to centralized hubs, resulting in job losses. He led the broadcaster's response to the Black Lives Matter movement. In a note to staff, Fran Unsworth, director of news, said the corporation was exploring future options for Ahmed, Allen, and Carr. However, the removal from the BBC News Group board, which has been cut from 11 to 8, leaves it entirely white. Ahmed, who is paid £205,000 a year, was criticized last year for accepting £12,000 to speak at a hedge fund conference. He later refunded the cash. The news of his exit stunned colleagues yesterday because the former Daily Telegraph and Observer journalist had only recently been put in charge of the commissioning structure. Several senior ethnic minority staff have expressed unease at Ahmed's removal and the message it sent about the BBC's commitment to diversity. Notice they're not talking about racism. They're talking about diversity, which is itself the choice, the use of that diversity is itself racist. Last night, supporters were drafting an open letter in protest. One ally accused BBC management of a Machiavellian closing of ranks. Another BBC source said that Ahmed had worked to reach unreserved audience, underserved audiences. He tried to engage different groups, and this is such a reward to type, they said. The smaller news board appears to violate a commitment made last year by the BBC to ensure that every senior leadership group had at least 2 black, Asian, or ethnic minority members. Carr earned £165,000 a year, and Allen £180,000. They will be entitled to severance package if made redundant now. So those two are paid 165,000 and 180,000 pounds, while Kamal Ahmed is paid 205,000 pounds a year. Now, that piece doesn't refer to racism, but the activities, the action it describes are racist. So why did the Times decide to run the piece but not call the behavior of Fran Answorth racist and the BBC? Now, above that piece in the Times on page 23 is another item about ethnicity. It says, TV channel faces Ofcom inquiry over blackface in 1970s comedy. And this is by, again, Matthew Moore, the media correspondent. That's the piece above it. TV channel faces Ofcom inquiry. Now that is false, misleading. Ofcom doesn't inquire into racism. And this is the one about the channel which is described as a family-run television channel, not a mainstream television channel, but the family-run television channel specializing in nostalgic program faces an Ofcom investigation into a 1970s series that shows actors in blackface and it's talking about the series called Rogues Rock, which was screened by Talking Pictures Television on Boxing Day. So that's the name of the family-owned or family-run TV channel. Let's look at this. This is the kind of tiniest tip of the racist iceberg in the mainstream British media. The ITV or one of the related program kind of operators have now started to screen Mind Your Language. Mind Your Language was screened by ITV in the 70s, and it was absolutely stuffed with racist kind of innuendos, racist utterances, racist, contents that could not be more kind of suitable for Little Englanders audience. And it has been now running online. And there is no reference to that one being the subject of any inquiry yet. I mean, those are the fictionalized kind of things. But the factual activities of the BBC, for example, as reported about Kamal Ahmed and the 2 other blacks in the Times today on page 23, this is the norm. Every day there are decisions being made to deny the existence of racism by the BBC, by the government, by the police, by the Home Office, by the corrupt, racist judicial bureaucracies. So even though the Times refers to the de facto effective kind of sacking of Kamal Ahmad by the BBC, and the Times using the context of racism and lack of diversity, the Times itself is doing as many racist things every day as the BBC is doing, proportionately. And the Times and the BBC and the rest of Fleet Street are doing the same every day, have been doing the same every day. Before going back to discussing diversity as a racistly chosen preferred word instead of racism or anti-racism, so what the Times does, for example, the platforms that are the most reliable kind of ones or clues, or which carry the most reliable kind of guide or sight of the extent of racism being practiced by that particular outlet, is the letters page. The letters page in the Times has been promoted by the Times itself many times over. But the letters page contains white prima facie. On the face of it is the meaning of prima facie. On the face of it, on the appearance of it, whites only names as the letter writers. I have had several letters in the Times, but mine have been in the minority in terms of numbers. And so therefore they don't constitute the norm. My letters have been rare in every respect. I have had letters in the Times, in the Guardian, in the Independent, in the other parts of Fleet Street as well. But my letters are not among the normal numbers or types, either in the identity of the person, the background of the person, or the contents that I have been discussing in the letters. So the Times and the Daily Boris Graph now and the Financial Times, I've had news items published in the Financial Times during the 1980s. But they have been not the norm. My appearances in the Fleet Street papers as the kind of person involved in the item in the news has been unrepresentative of the majority of the normal coverage of persons in the Financial Times. So when I say that this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, I am also addressing the diagnosis of why I have been featured as numerically unrepresentative of the normal contents of the coverage of these Fleet Street papers over the decades. Because I have, again, exclusive insight into the behavior of the Fleet Street papers. Because the issues that I represent and have represented, and the actions that I represent and have represented, are of the highest standard of engagement with rationality, with transparency, with morality, with ethics, accessibility and accountability and democracy, and above everything else, universality. So if I had not decided to call myself Muhammad Haque, when I did decide, and I did decide with absolute intent to test the extent to which the anti-Muslim culture of the institutions in Britain would dissent to obstruct me from getting the necessary support from these institutions, solely on the ground of my name being called Muhammad. The Haque bit is less obviously kind of a clue. The name Muhammad is related to the Prophet of Islam, peace be on him, and that is the reason why they are hostile. Regardless of my activities, whether they are solely derived from Islamic ideas or faith, or they are universal, that is to say, based on objective kind of grounds of evidence and engagement with people regardless of any faith or regardless of a particular faith to which the other people belong. And the benefits of my engagement with objective universal criteria apply to people of all faith backgrounds or people of no faith backgrounds or association as well. So what the anti-Muslim culture has been doing is denying the majority of the non-Muslims of the universal benefits that I represent in terms of action, activities, accountability, transparency. And that is what I told Fred Short. Now, Fred Short was an acquaintance of mine, and when he saw my name as Muhammad Haque, he said to me that that's it, you will not be allowed normal access to opportunities and platforms. He was absolutely right. And Fred Short was, of course, at that time when he spoke to me, was very much telling the truth. What has happened since I last had any contact with him, I do not know. But he spoke the truth at that time. And in doing so, Fred Short was being truthful. That is a rare kind of profile I have come across among most of the people that I encountered and I have met or I have had exchanges with, who are of European, white, indigenous identity and background. And when Fred Short told me that, he was part of a campaign, short-term campaign, for my getting elected as the publications editor in the Students' Union in what is now the University of East London. So Fred Short was a student. Now I decided to put my name Muhammad Haque and Muhammad at the beginning. After the late Paul Foote, who was editor of the Socialist Worker, published a piece based on my action against racism at that time. And although he incorrectly spelt the Muhammad, which is what normally the white persons do, because they do that with prejudice and lack of care. Because the same Muhammad, when spelled in connection with Muhammad Ali, they spell it correctly with the M-U-H-A-M-M-A-D. And I have been aware of this difference. And the difference is because they are subconsciously or consciously misspelling or incorrectly spelling the Muhammad in relation to me out of racist arrogance. Because they don't have that racist arrogance about Muhammad Ali, because either Ali has got, in their perception, the necessary funds to challenge them legally, which they think I don't have. So therefore, that is the reason for my choice of Muhammad, because I wanted to test the extent to which the racists and the anti-Muslims would go to block me, to obstruct me, to deny me, to refuse me equal platform. And the fact that they have been doing it, denying me this equality of platform and access, proves the point that they are totally dedicated, 100% dedicated against Muslims. They don't know the extent to which I am objectively independent of all the Muslim kind of operatives, and how highly critical I am on objectively evidential basis of so many Muslim operatives and agencies and institutions and states. But to them, the anti-Muslims, there is no difference between me and the very seriously, regularly criticized by me targets that are also Muslim. My targeting them is solely evidential, factual, not personal or prejudicial. For example, I am aware of the fact that I am very critical of most persons controlling access to the mosques in Britain. And the reason I am so critical is because of their misconduct, their corruption, their dishonesty. And I never would, and I never have taken side with any of those crooks, because they are Muslim. Most certainly not. To make the point, an Islamic or a Muslim outlook that I practice is based on the universal values of what is known now as human rights. So if a Muslim discriminates against a person who is not Muslim, and that discrimination to me is an offense, serious offense. And the list goes on. For example, when I have observed negligence or cruelty to cats by the persons who are Muslim, I have condemned them and I shall continue to condemn them and I shall oppose them. I have opposed them. I have exposed them to detailed examination based on their behavior. So what is happening with the Times newspaper running that piece about Kamal Ahmed? We now take to the point of detailed diagnosis of Kamal Ahmed's role. Kamal Ahmed, like other BBC or mainstream employed Muslim named persons, is a stooge. And this level of their being stooges also applies to people of African and Asian origin. Kamal Ahmed is of African origin, but is not similar to the non-Muslim people of African origin who are being given diversity kind of platforms and jobs and excuses by the BBC and in the Fleet Street slots. For example, The Guardian has got a few Muslim named contributors, but they're not contributing truthfully. They're not contributing to the level that I have, anywhere near the level that I have been practicing or being kind of concerned about and conscious of. The diversity word used about Kamal Ahmed was, of course, used by Theresa May in 2017, in October 2017, when she staged a series of stunts that were designed to give her the appearance of being against racism. But she was never against racism. She was always with the racists, and she was being racist even during that staging of that stunt. And she is a racist, and she has been exposed as a racist and as the person in office as the Home Secretary, who gave the direction to create a hostile environment against people, so-called migrants without documentation. So Kamal Ahmed, whatever the decoration, positive decoration given to him by the Times, Kamal Ahmed was never an anti-racist. Kamal Ahmed is known to have made up a lot of things about his abilities, his skills and backgrounds while he was connected with the Guardian group, which contains the Observer. So Kamal Ahmed has been personally exposed as a liar in print. And all these individuals of either Muslim origin or Muslim background or African or Asian background without any Muslim connection, every single one of these stooges has been given a spot which has not been to oppose racism, let alone to oppose anti-Muslim hostility and obstruction, but to perpetuate the racist and anti-Muslim kind of status quos in the particular organizations, but do so by disguising the perpetuation of those racist and anti-Muslim operations. The disguise as being the employment of the likes of Kamal Ahmad. Which is why the spate and the incidents and the occurrences of racism and anti-Muslim discrimination and hostility and obstruction, these occurrences continue, go on unabated. So for the last 1 hour or so, we have been talking about this. I've been talking about this without any notes in front of me, without any specifically kind of prepared script. So it's wider. The basis of my extempore presentation is on the long-term engagement against these discriminations, these lies, and my engagement with action campaign every day. So this is not possible for an institution like Oxford or Cambridge to offer. Nobody is doing what I've been doing, nor of the BBC or Sky or ITV or whatever. And if you cross over to the so-called geographical mainland in Europe, in France you find as vehement anti-Muslim hostility as you find in the UK. And as I said, I am not operating as a only Muslim activist or Muslim only activist. I'm operating as an international, objectively defined investigator, campaigner, whose work and engagements benefit and are intended to benefit people who are not Muslim at all, but based on the human rights and humanitarian kind of concepts. So what is happening in Britain in the treatment of people, say, who broke the kind of COVID restrictions, and taking into account the news items, the headlines in the last kind of 3 days, that people who broke the or break the kind of rules about COVID-19 will be liable to be sent to prison for 10 years. And also the others, to liable to be fined £1,200. These are being treated by the Fleet Street outlets, lying themselves. Because Boris Johnson broke the rules, as did his colluder, Dominic Cummings. And none of them has been subjected to any penalties or any prosecution. So it doesn't apply to them, which exposes the whole thing as totally dishonest. Now, we shall now look at Chaka. This boy, Umuna, was a crook. When he was a teenager, he was a liar. And this Chuka was active in Lambeth in London as a wannabe Labour Party politician, which he became. When his activities were drawn to my attention at the time, let's say in the 1980s, I condemned him as a racist stooge and as not worthy of being given the importance that he was being given by certain individuals, including individuals who brought this Chaka Umuna's activities to my attention. And when I condemned him, one of the persons said that I was wrong, that he was destined for great things. And I dismissed all of those as not at all true. Now, today's piece in the business section of the Boris Graph, today being Thursday, the 11th of February 2021, about Chaka, confirms what I said in the 1980s when he was a teenager. And I called him corrupt even in the 1980s. Now, there is no way that anybody else could have said that he was corrupt in the way that I did do in the 1980s. Because he, like Una King in Tower Hamlets, was being foisted by the racists in the Labour Party on electorates with significant numbers of voters either belonging to the African communities or the Asian community. In the case of Una King, who was foisted on Bethnal Green and Bow for the 1997, May 1997 election. She was foisted in the year before. I condemned her to her face. When I condemned her for her particular remark against a journalist at the time working at the Independent, which was a print publication at the time, this one was a Hindu journalist working for the Independent. And she had said something derogatory against that Hindu journalist sometime previously. And I had done my basic campaigning research. And when she appeared at the entrance of the Whitechapel underground station in the Whitechapel Road, I came across her by accident. I had no knowledge that she was going to appear at the entrance. But in the Whitechapel Market on a Saturday, she did appear. And she did appear shortly after being selected or imposed by Tony Blair, as the leader of the Labour Party at the time, as the candidate for Bethnal Green and Bow on behalf of the so-called Labour Party. So when I said to her that she had wrongly criticized a journalist also, because she had criticized that journalist who had published a report which contained a reference to Una King, making a slighting reference, a derogatory reference to Diane Abbott. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I have no time for Diane Abbott, because I think that she is a earlier kind of creation, a stooge of the earlier batch of racists, mainly epitomized by the Ken Lying Still Livingston. But you have to be very careful about diagnosing my contents. Despite the fact that Diane Abbott is no role model, as far as I'm concerned, but is a stooge of the racists in the Labour Party mainly. Even I acknowledge her human right to be treated fairly. She wouldn't do that about me, but I do that about her, and I do that about anybody else. And I shall come to that update in a short while. So when Diane Abbott was condemned by Una King, as reported by the independent reporter called Kim Sengupta. I think Sengupta is a Bengali name in West Bengal mainly now. It's a Hindu Bengali name, a Brahmin name, but despite the fact that Kim Sengupta and I were not personally acquainted, I had been acquainted with his writings in the Independent. So when he reported that the newly adopted Una King or newly fostered Una King had condemned Diane Abbott, I thought Una King was wrong to condemn Diane Abbott, because her condemnation of Diane Abbott was nothing to do with Una King being objective or fair or anti-racist, but opportunistic, and she wanted to make a claim for herself because she challenged Diane Abbott's candidature for the Hackney Northern Stoke Newington at one stage, which is what Kim Sengupta had referred to, and which is what I put to Una King when I challenged her in April 1996, I think, at the entrance of the Whitechapel underground station, where she was standing and with the support of a number of Bangladeshi members of the Labour Party from Tower Hamlets at the time. So I said to her, why did she do that? Why did she try to unseat or take away from Diane Abbott the seat of Hackney and Stoke Newington? Una King did not comment on that. She instead asked me who I was. Now, I had been active since before Una King was biologically born. And I am the most known activist among the Black and African, Asian, whatever backgrounds in this country. And the fact that she didn't know who I was gave me factual reason to condemn her on that point. I said if she didn't know who I was, then she was even more unfit than I had thought. Now, Una King, of course, got duly elected. But the fact that I had called her what I called her was vindicated very soon after her election. First of all, Una King was decorated because she is a mulatto, that is, she is a child of mixed parentage, mixed white parentage and African parentage, African origin parentage. She was decorated as the most glamorous of the 100 or so Blair babes. Other facts came to light later, showing that she was personally too close to a number of racists in the Labour Party. But those facts were not made any kind of subject of any political comments by us. We confined our commentary and observation on her behavior solely on the political platforms. Way before I exposed her as a liar, based on her lying about the congratulations. Una King asked Tony Blair to join her in offering to the crooks at the Tower Hamlets Council. That was in a question she put on the 17th of June 1998. Other events showed that she was a liar. So what I said earlier, that my commentary and my diagnosis against racists, against liars, against anti-Muslim haters are not based on any personal motivation, but on objectively verifiable facts. When she put that question to Tony Blair during the PMQs on the 17th of June 1998, remember how many years ago it was? I'm having to remember the exact kind of event and the date, which was 98, so 23 calendar years ago. And as the format or the form of the Hansard records show, her question was phrased in this way: will the Prime Minister join me? Etc., etc. Now, what she kind of said previous to that was that there was an index on poverty, and she referred to that index in claiming that Tower Hamlets, her constituency, was considered one of the poorest by that index. And so that preface she used to ask Tony Blair at the Prime Minister's questions on that day, and she asked or invited him to join her, Una King, in congratulating Tower Hamlets Council for reducing housing waiting list by 10%. Now, any student of logic and rationality can see that 10% is nine times less than 100%. So even if Tower Hamlets Council had reduced housing waiting list by 10%, logically it was meaningless, because 90% remained unreduced, actively undelivered by the Tower Hamlets Council, even by her claim. And whatever she claimed in that question, during that question time, could not be verified for a long time, could not be fact-checked for a long time. It is physically impossible to simultaneously, instantaneously do a mechanical check on statistical claims. Even now, 23 calendar years later, it cannot be done. It could not be done yesterday, or could not be done in the previous week's question time that is fronted by Boris Johnson, the proven liar. You cannot check facts unless you've got a database active and accessible to you instantaneously. So the claim that 10% of the housing waiting list had been reduced by the local council that covered her parliamentary constituency of Bethnal Green and Bow. It could not be checked. That's number one, factual, fact checking. So I contacted her office as the MP. My kind of official address was in her constituency, although my work has always covered and ranged across many parts of London and way wider than the official address. My address was in her parliamentary constituency. And as an active member of the Labour Party, I was on the roll as a member of the constituency party's management committee, or GMC, General Management Committee. So I'm giving all these diagnostic facts. Anyone watching this must know just how far I go to get the facts right, check the veracity. And what happened, I sent the necessary inquiry as a member of the staff in her parliamentary office asked me to do. So I did. I did that by fax at the time, I think, because in 1998, 1999, or I wasn't yet using the email system, as far as I can recall, without checking all the archives and so on of the time. I phoned and I sent the question in faxes, and I got no reply. So at the next kind of nearest meeting of the GMC, which I attended, and which as the MP she attended, I asked her the question, why had she, Una King, made that claim and congratulating Tower Hamlets Council? And at the meeting, attended by other people present, where other members of the GMC were present, Una King lied. She said she never congratulates people, or words to that effect that suggested that my question, based on her words on 17th of June 1998, were false, that didn't happen. In a few minutes, I shall produce on the screen before the camera what the records still show of her question asking Tony Bilaya to congratulate Tower Hamlets Council. So this is the one that I'm referring to. This is headed so this is the one that is headed engagements within brackets Hansard, and it's dated the 17th of June 1998, and it said it's on the website is called API. I hope I've got this I right and not confused it with an NEL. It's api.parliament.uk. That's the site where this is contained. And on the Prime Minister's question that it records, Una King's question is numbered as number 10. Well, it is numbered as Q10 full stop. And this is the view. Of course, it's not as large as maybe the screen needs to be, but that's the question. And in order to compensate for the comparative size of the text of the Hansard, I shall read that one. Question 10, Miss Una King, Bethnal Green and Bow. And it reads, is my right honorable friend aware that according to the German index, German is not spelled as the country, but German is like a name, Jarman. The German index since 1998 has been kind of replaced by some other indexes, but that one is valid for the fact of the record. German index, I represent, that is Una King represents, on 17th of June 1998, the most deprived area in Britain, that she said. Most deprived, not one of the most deprived, but the most deprived, question mark. Then she goes on, is he also aware the Tower Hamlets suffers from the greatest overcrowding in housing in Britain? In fact, 10 times the national average, she asks. Will he, that is Tony Blair or Blair, join me, Una King, in congratulating the council on reducing the housing waiting list by 10% over the past year? That was 97 to 98. Will he give us further assurances that more money will be made available for housing in the poorest areas of Britain? And Hansard then records the Prime Minister. I can give my honorable friend that assurance. Full stop. The Capital Receipts Initiative has already put some £50 million into London authorities. The figure will increase to almost 170 million this year, that is 1998. Obviously, that will make a difference to housing waiting lists, as will the Inner Cities Initiative, which attempts to deal with some of the worst housing estates. Perhaps most important, however, is the fact that under the New Deal, large numbers of people who are long-term unemployed, lone parents, or young people who have been unemployed for a significant period of time can get help to get a job. Getting a job and earning a decent standard of living is one of the most important factors in providing better housing. Now, that is Banality, Stupidity, Denial, and Racism by Tony Blair. We shall go back to Diagnosing Una King in a short minute. members of parliament, including Una C, that our movement renamed her, from Tower Hamlets or in the name of Tower Hamlets constituencies, including Una C, have been liars. And we date those back to Ian Micardo, Peter Shaw, and now the former Bethnal Green and Bow MP, George Galloway, and the one from Poplar and Limehouse, Jim F. Patrick, F, followed by few words of antagonism and outrage at his name. So these liars have lied without consulting the people of the constituency or seeking the approval of the aware, active members of the constituency on the wisdom, advisability, or veracity of the contents of what their lying statements, assertions were. Peter Shaw, the racist liar from Merseyside, who stayed as and perpetrated as the member for in the name of Stepney, one of the two constituencies anyway, in Tower Hamlets for too long. That liar took the side of the racist deniers in 1978 when he, in technical terms, correctly identified me as the only anti-racist campaigner who wanted him to answer questions at a meeting in the Toynbee Hall at 28 Commercial Street, London E1. So he said that he didn't think that I should be present at the meeting, which he was happy to share with about 15 or so others, all of them Bangladeshis. But he made a point of not accepting that I should attend the meeting. And those others were mental slaves, quite happy to be present while Shore was articulating his racist hostility towards my attending the same meeting. That is on the evidence. So Shore and Mikado were known as fans of Indira Priyadarshini. Note the word Priyadarshini. Gandhi. Her name was actually Indira Nehru, being the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru. But those two were among the British fans of Indira Priyadarshini Gandhi. It is possible that quite a few of those fans physically fancied Indira Priyadarshini, because the word Priyadarshini actually was quite literally true. She was good looking, and the Priyadarshini means good looking female. Especially I noticed the language that Ian Mikado used in conversations with me about Indira Priyadarshini Gandhi. He didn't use Priyadarshini, but he referred to her with a deference. Although Indira herself wasn't present while I was having the conversation with Ian Micardo, Micardo did refer to her as Madam. He didn't have any obligation, politically, socially, or otherwise. But his brainwashing was conditioned on the assumption, very positive assumption around Jawaharlal Nehru that prevailed in the establishment in Britain. That Nehru was the rightful successor to the British Empire and the British imperialists. So his daughter was treated as the daughter of the equivalent of the white kind of occupants in the years and the period around August 1947. So Micardo was lying there because he was praising Indira Gandhi, who was not present in London, in those terms, while he was denying the various details of the lies propagated and promoted by Indira Gandhi herself and the regime that she occupied at the time. And as I have said before, Morarji Desai, I caught him behaving as a stooge and a kind of timid occupant of the office of the Indian Prime Minister in 1977. I challenged him to condemn the racist James Callaghan and the Commonwealth. And Desai completely failed to answer the question. So anyone who says that Desai was an intellectual, this and that, absolute rubbish. Desai was dishonest and Desai was timid. I also spoke to at length. Over a period of 3 or 4 days, I asked then Bangladesh President post holder Ziaur Rahman many questions about, obviously, Bangladesh itself, its foreign policy, its economics, its social politics, and everything else. Contrasted with Morarji Desai, whom I spoke to or addressed at a press conference held in the India House in the Strand. Ziaur Rahman's answers to me were, obviously, because of the length of my questions and the frequencies of my questions over several days, Ziaur Rahman's answers to me, or let's say responses to me, were not apparently based on his policy of being a stooge of the British or any other country or government. They were vocalized less in a style of being a timid person. But the fact that he was not coming across as timid didn't stop his sweat falling over his face. Because clearly Ziaur Rahman was sweating when I was asking him questions. Why he was doing that, I cannot say, because I never had a personal kind of conversation with him other than at the meetings. But my questions remain valid, and I shall be recalling and updating as many of them as I can in due course, not in this particular part. So what I'm saying here is that all my engagements, and I have said before previously about my question on British government racism, that I put to James Callaghan, the most racist Labour Prime Minister that I can recall. Callaghan was an idiot, an intellectually below average kind of person, but who was made worse, who became even worse because of his racism and stupidity and racist ignorance. Where have I come from? I have come from Una King, 17th of June 1998. And the things that she said to Tony Blair at that time, and in that question, need constant review and updating, which I shall be doing in due course, about housing, about poverty, about Tower Hamlets Council. So this is looking like I have been broadcasting this particular one for just over 2 hours. So we shall take a break here and see the details in the next parts or editions.